Harvest of Love. A chapter from the book, There is No Such Thing as a Typical Librarian, by Steven Antonuccio. When I first moved to Colorado Springs, my two girls were very young, and since we didn't have much disposable income at the time, we were always looking for inexpensive things for them to do. I quickly learned about the Venatucci pumpkin farm that allowed kids to walk in the pumpkin field to pick their own pumpkins for free. The Venatucci farm was open to the public during October, leading up to Halloween. This farm family had displayed this incredible generosity for almost 30 years, since the early 1950s. The farm was owned by a married couple, Nick and Bambi Venatucci. Nick was in his 70s at that time, and Bambi was 20 years younger. They had no children of their own, and this was their way of giving back to the community's young people. It was quite an operation that required several volunteers to make it successful. There were set hours to visit the farm, and you would park your car in a field, walk to a nearby pumpkin patch, and pick your own pumpkins. During the week, school buses arrived in the morning with their classes. For many of these city kids, it was the first time they had ever seen a farm. When I moved to Colorado Springs, it was a city of 350,000 people. The Venatuccis gave away an average of 40,000 pumpkins per year. At least a third of the children in the city visited the Venatucci farm each year. I did not meet Nick and Bambi during my kids' first visit. My girls, like most children, ran through the fields and picked a pumpkin they could barely lift. We repeated this adventure every year until I started working for the Pikes Peak Library District. In 1990, one of the local school districts approached the library and recommended documenting this generous family by interviewing Nick and producing a video portrait on his life. I jumped at the opportunity to record the family history. It was a unique story, and the Venatucci family needed to be honored for their generosity. I also wanted to tell a positive story about an Italian-American family. I had a chip on my shoulders from all the negative films that portrayed Italian-Americans as criminals and mobsters. With my long ethnic name, people wondered or joked about my mafia connections. My father also was sensitive to this portrayal, knowing how loving and gentle his father was. His mother always told an amusing story related to this type of stereotyping when he was younger. He came home from school when he was around 6 years old and complained to his mother that another child had told him that all Italians are cutthroats. My grandmother immediately became upset and advised him, "Don't let other people insult you like that. You know, from your own family, that Italians are hard-working people who love their country and their families." My dad looked at my grandmother with innocent eyes and asked his mom, "What's a cutthroat?" My grandmother then laughed and realized her gentle and naive son didn't even know what the insult meant. There was nothing I could do about all these mob stories and negative portrayals of Italian Americans, but I could produce a positive documentary about this amazing and generous family. As I learned more about the Venatucci family, I realized the story of the family had more depth than any 30-minute documentary could do it justice. Nick Venatucci married Bambi when he was 60 years old. They had a secret romance for almost 30 years before they finally married. Even though they were both children of Italian-American immigrants and devout Catholics, Nick's family rejected Bambi because she had been born blind. They kept their romance a discreet secret until his mother died, and Nick finally married Bambi and brought her to live with him on the farm. Both Nick and Bambi came from coal mining families and were first-generation Americans. To escape poverty in their home country, many Italians immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s. They were mostly poor peasants with minimal formal educations who had strong backs and were willing to take any job they could find. Most Americans at that time were unwilling to work underground in the hazardous coal mines, so many immigrants took those dangerous jobs when they first arrived in the United States. At that time, the homes in America were heated by coal-burning stoves, long before natural gas became the heating source of choice. Underground coal mines were numerous throughout Colorado, and Bambi's father worked in a coal mine near Boulder. The Venatucci family worked in a coal mine in Pape Town near Colorado Springs. The goal of most immigrant coal miners was to work hard and to bring the rest of their immigrant families to the United States. If they worked even harder and saved their money, they hoped to leave the mines and to start a small business or to buy a farm. That was the Venatucci family's dream. When Nick was 13 years old, his family bought a farm in Security, Colorado. It was a difficult life, but they were delighted to work on their own farm making money for themselves. Working outside meant that they didn't risk their lives every time they descended into the mine. With the start of the Great Depression, food prices plummeted, and farming became an even more difficult life that required all the kids to work hard in order to survive and to keep the farm. Nick was an average student whose formal education ended after the 8th grade. He was needed on the farm at an early age to help the family raise cattle and to grow corn. Nick's real interest was baseball. In the early 1930s, he played on numerous amateur teams in Colorado Springs. Professional baseball was the most popular sport in the United States then, and there was no bigger star than the Bambino, Babe Ruth of the New York Yankees. Nick was a catcher with a powerful arm. He was about the same size as Yogi Berra and had natural athletic ability. Every company in the area had their own amateur hardball team. The Alexander Film Company and the coal mining companies all sported baseball teams, and Nick was a sought-after local player. His dream was to leave the farm to play professional baseball. He knew if he stayed in Colorado Springs, he lost a chance to achieve his dream. At 19 years old, he saved his money and begged his parents to let him attend a California baseball school where the professional teams sent scouts to find prospects for their farm teams. After he completed the baseball school, to his amazement, he was signed by the New York Yankees to play on one of their farm teams. In 1 year, he advanced from a D farm team to an A farm team for the Yankees. His future was very bright in professional baseball, until his father called. His older brother was killed in a well accident on the farm. The gas pump generator that brought the water from the well caught fire, killing his brother instantly from the resulting explosion. His father needed Nick back on the farm to help his grieving family and to take the place of his older brother, who had been running the farm. Without hesitation, Nick abandoned his professional baseball dream and returned to Colorado. He never looked back, and from the age of 22 until he died in his 80s, he never regretted abandoning his baseball dream to be the devoted son his family depended on. Working 12 hours a day on his farm didn't leave much time for socializing. Other than going to St. Mary's Catholic Church on Sundays, he didn't have time to meet women and to start his own family. It was a lonely existence, but he knew his parents needed him. As Colorado Springs expanded, it turned out the city needed more water to supply the growing population's needs. During an extended drought, the situation in the city became desperate. The exclusive Broadmoor Hotel, built by Spencer Penrose in 1918, suddenly did not have enough water to keep their famous golf courses green. The Venatucci farm was over the water-rich Widefield Aquifer. The water supply on the Venatucci farm was plentiful and very valuable. The city and the Broadmoor Hotel signed a deal with the Venatuccis to pay for their water and to pump a portion of their water to the Broadmoor Hotel. Since the water was worth a small fortune, the Venatucci family slowly acquired real wealth from their water rights. Although they still farmed their land, the financial pressure that Nick felt when he abandoned his baseball career was now over. He now was free to concentrate on the pumpkin and corn business. One day, he was delivering a truck full of pumpkins to a store downtown when he noticed a group of kids staring at the bright orange pumpkins. Feeling generous, he invited the kids to select a free pumpkin off his truck and to carry it home. Other kids noticed and asked Nick if they could have a free pumpkin. Nick gave away half his truckload that day, and that was the impetus for the great pumpkin giveaway at the Venatucci farm. Nick expanded the pumpkin giveaway and invited local schools to visit the farm and allowed each student to pick a free pumpkin. Bambi had her own fascinating history before she ever met Nick. Bambi Marcantonio's journey to Colorado Springs began as a child when she was sent to the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind for her education. Born with limited sight that she lost completely by the time she was 5 years old, Bambi spent her early life in a close and loving immigrant Italian-American family. Her father was a coal miner who eventually left the mines and became a skilled carpenter. She was extremely close to her father, who always told her in Italian to dammi la mano, which translated to, "Give me your hand." He would hold her hand and show her what a bird felt like, or a frog, or a tree, and many other wonderful things that she was unable to see. When she was 7 years old, Her parents realized that without her sight, she couldn't learn in a traditional school. In the 1870s, the generous General William Jackson Palmer founded the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. Two of the early graduates were a deaf couple who were the parents of Lon Chaney, the silent film star who was also known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. His ability to express himself visually was enhanced by his experiences communicating with his deaf parents. Bambi's parents realized her best bet for an education was for her to attend the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. For Bambi, whose first language was Italian, it was a difficult adjustment to attend a boarding school 100 miles from her home. When her parents arrived in Colorado Springs on the train with their little girl, the three of them cried openly, knowing Bambi couldn't live with them anymore. They realized that they needed to leave her at the school in order for her to develop the skills she needed to live independently as a blind woman. Bambi was an extremely bright young woman who flourished in school. She learned Braille, and her whole world opened up once she developed the ability to read. She read as many Braille books she could find. Upon graduation from the school in 1949, she attended the University of Colorado. Because of her blindness, everything was a challenge, but she was determined to become the first blind graduate at CU and to eventually become a teacher. After graduation in 1954, she applied for a teaching job at her old school in Colorado Springs. It took some time, but she was hired eventually as the first blind alumni to teach at the school, and for the next 30 years, she taught young blind students how to read and how to survive in the world. She was honored as the Colorado Teacher of the Year in 1983 because of her teaching ability and her unique perspective for relating to her students. What brought Nick and Bambi together was an amusing encounter that ended up becoming a lifelong romance. Bambi was in her mid-20s, and Nick was almost 20 years older in his early 40s. Nick noticed Bambi in church and wondered who this attractive young woman was. Even though Bambi was blind, she wore glasses to avoid drawing attention to her disability. She didn't want to be known as that blind woman, since she was a very capable individual who maneuvered very well in familiar settings, like St. Mary's Church in Colorado Springs, or in her apartment. Nick asked his sister who this attractive woman was and found out where she lived. He went to Bambi's apartment with a box of fresh vegetables and introduced himself. She invited him in for coffee, and Nick still had no idea that Bambi was blind. She walked around her familiar apartment with no problems, and they had a pleasant conversation. Nick asked if he could call her on the phone, and she gave him her phone number. When Nick called her the next day, they spoke for hours. They were two lonely people who had been waiting their whole lives to find their soulmates. Since they were both Catholics, the children of Italian immigrants whose fathers had worked in the mines, they had so much in common. Bambi talked about her life as a teacher at the deaf and blind school and how she would love to bring her students to the farm to pick pumpkins. Nick invited Bambi to his farm, and he wanted to introduce her to his mother. At this point, Bambi knew she had to tell him she was blind. "I know you didn't know this since I wore glasses when you met me, and I was in the familiar surroundings of my apartment, but I was born blind." When Bambi tells the story, she recalls a long moment of silence on the phone, and she knew that this would most likely be her last conversation with Nick. After the initial shock, Nick started talking again. "I had no idea. You get along pretty well. If it is okay with you, I would like to call you again. And I would love to have you and your students visit my farm." Bambi instantly knew this farmer was a good man. "I would love to go. We have buses at the school and we could make it a field trip." After a hard day on the farm, Nick called Bambi almost every night, and they both reviewed their day. When Nick had a chance, he brought a box of vegetables to her apartment, and they chatted for hours about their hopes and dreams. It was very difficult for them to have an open relationship. His family didn't see how Nick could marry a blind woman and bring her on the farm. Despite the fact she was a college-educated, independent woman, his family didn't see how she could be useful to Nick if they were to marry. Bambi felt horrible about being rejected by his family. They were so compatible in every way, and they loved each other. Reluctantly, she agreed to keep their relationship a secret. Their clandestine romance survived for the next 30 years, until his mother died. Nick and his brother Tony were now alone on the farm. Finally, there was no obstacle to their love, and Nick asked Bambi to marry him. She was 50 years old and he was 70 when she moved into the family home on the farm. She made that house her own, and as a capable, educated woman, she became his business partner, taking care of the correspondence and the bills that needed to be paid. She was an excellent cook and had a precise memory for everything in her kitchen. During the harvest, she was a big help with feeding the workers. Over the telephone, she arranged the school visits that became a massive undertaking with 50,000 visitors to the farm each October. When I met Bambi and Nick for the documentary, Bambi wanted to keep a low profile. She didn't even want me to mention in the documentary the fact that she was blind, but she was comfortable and proud to talk about her husband. She wanted the documentary to be about Nick, but Bambi's story was equally important. Fortunately for the library, she had been writing an autobiography about her experiences growing up blind and living in a loving immigrant family. She also wrote about her relationship with Nick and her many life struggles. She wrote her autobiography on a Braille typewriter and then read her Braille chapters into a cassette recorder. My wife listened to the cassette and transcribed her words on a computer. Over the period of a few months, she completed her book, Dammi la mano, Give Me Your Hand. The Friends of the Pikes Peak Library District published her book, and the first 1,000 copies sold out immediately. She recorded an audio version of her book in her own words, and it is a valuable resource for Colorado Springs history. While producing the documentary and helping Bambi publish her book, I got to know the family very well. One of my most extraordinary experiences was sitting in Bambi and Nick Venatucci's kitchen and enjoying a home-cooked meal. My parents were also invited, since they were visiting Colorado Springs at the time. It was amazing how Bambi moved through her kitchen with ease, knowing the location of every obstacle and the placement of every pot and pan. The Venatucci farm was famous for their sweet corn, and my family and I enjoyed a meal of spaghetti, her delicious homemade meatballs, and ears of cooked sweet corn. Nick pointed out to me, "You better not put salt or butter on my sweet corn. It is so tasty by itself. It would be a sin if you put anything on it." He was right. His sweet corn was the best corn I have ever eaten. It was one of those rare moments that brought together many of the people I loved, sharing a meal in this remarkable couple's home. It was a moment in time that can never be repeated. As Lou Reed says in his song, "It was a perfect day." When I reflect on the many fascinating and remarkable people I have met and interviewed, most of them have now passed on. As I analyze my own life, I realize my best moments are a series of shared experiences. Those experiences remained locked in time. Once that special time has passed, they can only exist in my heart and memory. I have been fortunate to have had spent many wonderful moments with the people I love. That's all we have in the end, the moments and the time shared with loved ones during this remarkable human experience.